So I'm going to do a little bit of framing, and then we're going to bring a fabulous panel out with Oakland's mayor and representatives from Pandora and Google. Okay, so I think everybody knows the numbers by now, but let's just have a reminder that of all of the companies that have released their data over the past year, it looks sort of like this. 2/3 male, 1/3 female, about 60% white, about 28 to 30% Asian, and less than 5% Latino, and about 3% black. So we know that isn't what America looks like. Another bit of grounding here, who took the AP Computer Science exam? So what we find is that 0 African Americans took the AP Computer Science exam, which is really a prerequisite to get into top tech engineering jobs. 0 African Americans took that in 12 of our 50 states. 0 Latinos took that exam in 7 of our 50 states. And girls took that exam in, did not take that exam in 2 of our 50 states. Unacceptable. Especially when you think that in public schools throughout the U.S. now, right now, this academic year, 2014-2015, is the first ever that kids of color are the majority. So unless we figure out how to get them on track and interested into tech, we're not going to have as robust a tech ecosystem. So what do we have? People have been talking ever since the numbers have been coming out about we have a pipeline problem. But I think we've also got a leaky pipeline problem, and you can see all of those poor people just falling right through those cracks there. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and our panel's going to look at what the solutions actually are. How many of you spent a little bit of time last month deciding about this dress? Look familiar? How many of you thought it was white and gold? How many of you thought it was blue and black? Okay, actually more of you seem to think it was white and gold. So what on earth does this have to do with a pipeline or a leaky pipeline? Those of us who saw it as white and gold were absolutely certain it was white and gold and that everybody else was wrong, misinformed, what's wrong with them. That is the same lens we bring to decisions about who's quote-unquote most qualified, or who's the best and the brightest, or how we should recruit. We are really, really, really convinced that we know the one right answer. Turns out it's not quite that simple. So, tell me what this says. Out loud? The cat, right? Well, look at that. 1/3 of those symbols are the same, and in one context, that symbol is undeniably an H, and the identical symbol in a different context is undeniably an A. So what else depends on context about who fits, who doesn't fit? So we've got a leaky pipeline. It happens starting in schools. The Pygmalion effect is a study that was done actually decades ago where randomly teachers were told, these kids are your stars, these kids are not going to make it, and at the end of the school year, guess what happened? The people that the teachers were told were going to be your stars, again, names drawn out of a hat, turned out to be the stars. What if we start telling all the tech companies that all of their stars are in Oakland Unified School District and they need to come find them? So we know that social belonging gets interrupted along this pipeline. The absence of role models makes a difference. There's bias in screening resumes for race, for gender, for LGBT population, and then people leave because they feel that they've been unfairly treated. Which one of these looks like a tech person? How about that one? Son of a VC. How about that one? Son of a janitor. How about that one? Legacy admit to Stanford. First in family to go to college. B+ average, B+ average. Intern for dad's friend at a tech company, worked part-time after school. The person on the left, I've shown this now at 2 big tech companies in the last 10 days, and I asked people, which one's a culture fit? Universally, before finding out any characteristics, everybody says the guy on the left. If we can't get past screening for what people are wearing, we are in big trouble. We also ought to find out, why would that gentleman show up in a suit to an interview at a tech company? Maybe because that is the highest sign of respect from his family or his culture he can convey. Maybe it's a sign of how important this is to him, this opportunity that will transform himself, his future, and his family. So before deciding doesn't fit, let's learn to ask the right questions. Laszlo Bach, who's the Senior VP of People Ops at Google, has said after mining data from Google hiring for 15 years, they found out all those brain teasers they were asking people, how many golf balls fit in a, 737 airplane. So you have to know what a golf ball size is, you have to know what a 737 airplane is. So those things have a little bit of cultural bias in there. So brain teasers aren't good, GPAs and test scores turn out not to be good predictors of being a great engineer because academic environments are artificial. So let's figure out what to replace those things with. For those who go out on their own, we also see bias in startup pitch competitions. Silicon Valley is supposed to be the perfect meritocracy. But it turns out if you send out a business plan that's already been funded, already won a pitch competition, you send out an identical pitch deck. One version is narrated by a male voice, one narrated by a female voice, identical business plan. Identical narration except the gender of the voice. 68% of the judges fund when the guy narrates it, and only 32% fund when the female voice narrates it. So we have to recognize we're all biased. We've got to get past those biases individually, but very importantly, as companies and as a tech ecosystem. So what does make a difference? 4 things up here: role models, social belonging exercises, friendly physical environments that have people that look like you, that have people who've accomplished things from your background, and empathy, our ability to see ourselves in other people. Lived experience also matters. These are 4 CEOs from the Kapor Capital portfolio. Kapor Capital is based a few blocks from here in Oakland. Piazza, the CEO is Pooja Nath Sankar. She's got an article in Fortune about bias against women in computer science. She started Piazza because none of the boys, when she was studying computer science, would study with her. And she started a company so that nobody ever has to study alone. And she's doing extraordinarily well. Up there is Pigeonly. Frederick Hudson is the CEO. Pigeonly is, their first product is dramatically reducing the price of phone calls to and from prison. Why? Frederick had the experience of being incarcerated himself. He was the best logistics guy for all the neighborhood marijuana dealers. And the unfortunate part is that he wasn't in the state of Washington or the state of Colorado, so that turned out not to be terribly legal. But his lived experience gave him great ideas for a business that's doing extraordinarily well. Regali is about international remittances, how to disrupt that, how to do something so that 30% of your money doesn't get eaten by Western Union, and how your grandma doesn't wait in line for 4 hours and then get mugged leaving the Western Union office in her home country. Lindsay over there on the bottom right, Lindsay is the CEO of Schoolzilla, which is actually just a few blocks headquartered here in Oakland. She came out of Aspire charter schools, and it is data warehousing to predict not what to do when a kid falls off track, but to predict when a kid might fall off track and prevent that from happening. How to keep lots more kids on track towards careers in tech. Some of you may know that the Level Playing Field Institute, a group nonprofit I started, runs a Summer Math and Science Honors Academy. We've been taking Oakland kids. This will be our 12th summer. We take kids from throughout the Bay Area. We have absolutely outstanding outcomes in changing the trajectory of these kids' lives. As we like to say, zip codes do not predict talent. They only predict opportunity. And SMASH and other programs like it make up for those gaps. So here, some of you know, my husband, Mitch Kapor, seated there, on the left. He'll kill me if I showed you this slide. That's the big oil burner computer thing behind him. The right slide is Haley, who's actually now majoring in engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley. Mitch's ability to empathize, to see himself in Haley, and to see that Haley wants what he wanted. He got an opportunity for a summer program. Every kid should have an opportunity for a summer program to put them on a path to tech. This is what tech looks like now. This is what tech needs to look like here in Oakland. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to all of you for coming, and to Vator Splash for hosting this awesome event and this panel on diversity called When Will Tech Look Like America? My name again is Evie Nagy. I'm a staff writer at Fast Company magazine based right here in Oakland, focusing on our most creative people in business. A few months ago, I wrote a story about the women executives at Lyft, the ride-sharing company, and the major hook for the story was that of Lyft's 40 director-level and above executives company-wide, 19 are women. So, you know, just under 50%, and not quite, but almost representative of the human population. And the story exploded. The statistic was not common knowledge, and readers were beside themselves with surprise and praise for the company, or in some cases, reactionary comments about how this wasn't news. All that matters is that the best people get the jobs. And that, of course, was just a focus on gender, not race, or the intersection of the two. Needless to say, this is a critical issue to the future of the technology industry, our economy, and our cultural advancement, and I'm honored to be a part of this discussion with some very distinguished leaders working on these issues. Farida Kaber-Klein has already been introduced, and thank you very much for starting us off. We also have Mayor Libby Schaaf, mayor of the city of Oakland, who was elected this past November after serving for 4 years as a city council member. She was born and raised in Oakland and has spent most of her career in public service in the city, including as an aide, excuse me, to Mayor Jerry Brown. Wow. Nilka Thomas. Nilka Thomas is the manager of global diversity and talent inclusion at Google, where she's worked for over 10 years on workforce development and creating an inclusive culture with an emphasis on Google's outreach and strategies focused on women, blacks, and Hispanics. Lisa Lee is the senior diversity manager at Pandora. Prior to Pandora, Lisa started her career in tech as one of the early employees at Facebook, where she worked in user operations, product operations, and diversity. She is also the co-founder of Thick Dumpling Skin, a community forum dedicated to discussing body image issues and eating disorders in the Asian American community. And is Kimberly? Okay. Kimberly Bryant is founder at Black Girls Code, a top technology education nonprofit focusing on teaching girls ages 6 to 17 from underrepresented communities skills in computer programming and technology. She has a background in biotechnology, manufacturing, and engineering at companies in the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, chemical, and consumer products industries. So thank you all very much for coming. Very excited. So we'll just start off here, and people can jump in as they feel moved to do so. A key word in most discussions about diversity in tech or in any field really is pipeline. But a pipeline is long. Maintaining it requires preparing young people for education and careers, giving them an equal opportunity to get jobs, and giving them support and development while they're there so that they stay in the field and advance. Each of you does work at one or more points in this pipeline, so I'd like to hear about what you're each specifically doing that is promising at different stages of people's education and careers, as well as where you feel there needs to be more attention at any given stage. And of course, this can mean a lot of things, from resources for individual people to institutional or public policies. This is obviously very broad. We're not going to cover this entire topic today, but I'd really love to hear some of your thoughts. So we can start. Kimberly, I'll start with you.
So for us with Black Girls Code, we really focus on the work in the K through 12 space, primarily probably grade 4 or 5 through 12, really focusing on introducing an intersection, girls of color from ages 7 to 17 to technology, and really making sure that we feed this pipeline with women, and particularly with women of color, with the skill sets as well as the mentoring as well as the experience to create opportunities for themselves and others in the tech field. So that is the focus of our work and how we have kind of chosen to work on the diversity and inclusion issue, specifically as it relates to empowering women of color.
So I'll mention a little bit how Google's focused on the pipeline. I think pipeline is the big conversation, and it needs to be. Around about this time last year when we released our numbers and several other companies followed suit, it was pretty clear that pipeline is a really big issue, and all of us as tech companies have a tremendous amount of work to do. So we're thinking about the pipeline as pretty multifaceted, and we need to be making significant investments throughout it. So starting as far back as sort of the K through 12 experience, but also thinking about how do we change some of our numbers in the short run, because 10, 12 years to get people through the pipeline is fantastic, and we absolutely have to be doing that. But I think there's an expectation that we start to diversify our workforces sooner than that. So some of the things that we're doing, what I call sort of closing the last mile. So one of the things that we are I think struggling with is we need to be, for one, going to different places to find candidates. I think Google for many years, like many tech companies, were just going through to the elite institutions, and that was solely our recruiting strategy. And there was a shortcoming in that, obviously. One of the things that we're doing is making deeper investments into the HBCU pipelines. And a challenge there has been that we, for several years, we've been on those campuses and trying to recruit those students, but for a variety of reasons, haven't had a tremendous amount of success. So instead of stopping our recruitment efforts there, we're actually making deeper institutional investments to help those students be more successful over the 4 years that they're at those academic institutions, making sure that by the time they leave those doors, they're ready for jobs at Google and companies like Google. So for instance, last year we launched our Googler in Residence program, where we actually took engineers from Google and put them into the classrooms at Howard University was the first school, and this year we're on five other campuses. The idea being we need to help to kind of revamp that curriculum to make sure that those students are prepared. And we've seen some early success where we've actually been able to hire students in internship positions just through 1 year of intervention. The other place that we're making some investments is through a program that we call CS Academy. So this is taking people that are almost there, have a tremendous amount of potential, but perhaps today couldn't get hired at Google. So we spend a year giving them an apprenticeship and focusing on some classroom learning. And at the end of that experience, there's a pretty tremendous experience to hire those folks, or opportunity to hire those folks full time. So those are some things that we think are going to change what our workforces look like in the next sort of 18 to 24 months pretty significantly.
All right, well, as mayor of Oakland, I get to fly at a certain altitude and not just have to think about one thing like diversity in my particular company. I've got to look at the big picture and the interrelativity of all these different factors. And so when I look at the pipeline, I'm looking pretty early on. I'm looking at things like preschool. Oakland Unified School District, only 40% of our kindergartners show up ready to learn for kindergarten. So one of the things, and I know this might seem like it doesn't relate to diversity in tech, but it actually does. Improving quality and access to preschool, I believe, is part of feeding that pipeline. The issue about raising the minimum wage. When you have parents where both parents have to work 2 full-time jobs just to pay rent in the Bay Area, that is not creating an environment where kids are going to be successful in school and prepared to enter the tech world. And so raising the minimum wage, which is something that I've been very passionate about here in Oakland, is part of that pipeline. And then finally, there are certainly structural things that we're looking at with regard to city policies, with regard to partnerships. But at the end of the day, policies and structures are one thing. But human relationships, I think, are the most important thing of all. And I think when we look at how we all got to the jobs that we're in, we have to acknowledge that social capital, relationships, are so much of what gets anyone anywhere. And so even though it's not part of my official duties as mayor, I spend a lot of time using my position as someone who has connections into a lot of people to start talking about, and we actually were just having a great conversation backstage about mentoring and having a great experience with high school interns. because it's that social connection. And I am working really hard to make sure that all the adults in Oakland reach out and find a young person to inspire them, to teach them all those important things you don't learn at school that really are the key to success, probably in any career, but particularly in tech.
Yeah. I feel like we're part of this awkward family portrait right now. It's like, but, you know, thank you for saying that. I think that really resonates with me because, you know, I think each of us, yes, absolutely, there are things that we can do programmatic wise, right? And I think every company, or I'd like to think every company, is exploring options for doing programs. But actually what I think has been pretty fascinating for me is the language around diversity, the language around culture. How is it that we talk about the way that we're hiring, and who is it that we hire for? So, you know, I think there are some interesting things that's taking place at Pandora. For example, the way that we are very unapologetic around work-life integration, right? So, you know, my favorite story to tell is I was at one of our onboarding sessions, and Tim Westergren had to dial in, he's the founder of Pandora, had to dial in a video conference in from Virginia or something like that. And he opens up and he says, you know, hi everyone, this is Tim. If you've heard Tim talk, this is exactly how he talks. And he says, you know, I'm here to talk about our principles and values, and oh, by the way, in the next 30 minutes, my daughter is gonna come and say goodnight to me. Okay, so let's continue, right? It's not like I'm so sorry, you know, it's our nightly ritual or anything like that. He just says, my daughter's gonna come and say goodnight to me, and then, you know, we'll carry on. And exactly, you know, 30 minutes later, this little head pops up and she's like, where are all those people? And he's like, oh, this is Pandora's office. And I love that we can be so, again, unapologetic in the way that we talk about the roles that we have outside of work, which I think is really important when it comes to talking about whether or not you're a parent, whether or not you're single and trying to be a parent, or whether or not you're, you know, a musician, traveling, whatever it is, like having that flexibility. And then I think the other thing is, I think with any good problems, you have to segment it out. You have to look at all different possibilities. So for us, it's not just looking at, there's the pipeline, and then there's the actual application funnel, which, like Nilka said, is kind of that your last stretch, your last mile, because you can pipeline for as long as you want, but if people are not actually making it into the application funnel, then that's a problem as well. So I think for us, it's really matching the kind of partnerships that we have with every level of hiring that we do. There are your interns, there are entry levels, there are mid-level individual contributors and managers, right? At every single stage, there are different partnerships, different events, different strategies that you have to take. It's not a one glove fits all, so yeah.
Well, I had the opportunity to open and told you a little bit about, in particular, our SMASH program, our Summer Math and Science Honors Academy for low-income kids of color. As I said, this will be our 12th summer. We are on 4 campuses currently, and we're expanding. Our next expansion is Davis, which is on its way to being a Hispanic-serving institution in the next couple of years. And then the year after we open Davis, we're going to also be looking probably at Morehouse at an HBCU and at another public university, most likely University of Michigan. But one of the things that's really important is to understand the difference between an inspirational program and a transformational program. And we need both. We need for Kimberly to expose as many girls as possible, as many girls of color, to what you can do if you learn to code, if you learn about tech. But we need programs all the way along to hand the girls to make sure they don't fall through those leaks in the pipeline. And when I talk about the leaky pipeline and I talk to the companies, one of the things I'm really concerned about is that we have such elite, biased notions of who fits. And unless the companies are going to work on that, we're not going to have as many different people, as many low-income people, as many people of color, as many women from all backgrounds getting through that funnel.
Yeah.
And I mean, sort of along those lines of the leaky pipeline as you go along, if each one of you could, you know, we've talked a lot about sort of the early education side and the recruitment side. Are there particular obstacles, or if you could wave a magic wand, something that you would change at the point at which, you know, after which people are actually hired, that would maintain their careers, make sure that, you know, obviously there's maintain the retention of people, you know, maybe that even if their education was completely directed the right way, I mean, people fall out. So is there anything that you would change sort of along the career lines?
Yeah, I think Frida just talked about this around, you know, we have such elite notions of who fits, right? That even if somebody doesn't make it through into a company, the kind of what I call microaggressions that face somebody who works at a company is so frequent and so often, and those are things that we don't even really spend a lot of time talking about. I mean, I had a session at work maybe a couple of months ago where we opened up with, let's talk about microaggressions. 3/4 of the employees there didn't know what microaggressions were, you know, and it is small things like me getting my coffee in the morning and then talking to somebody and they're like, oh, well, where are you from? No, where are you really from, right? It's stuff like that. Or, well, you know, and automatically assuming that an employee speaks a language that they might not necessarily, you know, speak, and very small, tiny things like projects, always going to, you know, males versus females, or more of the housekeeping kind of tasks always being delegated towards females. So I think a lot of these things, like culturally as a company, we need to address, and I feel like right now we're addressing them in a very siloed way. We're teaching our underrepresented employees how to deal with that and how to essentially protect themselves, but we're not addressing kind of the larger overall company culture of how we can change things like that. Yeah.
I would say, you know, one thing that's, you know, very apparent is that equal pay issue for women, you know, has to be addressed. Even in the Silicon Valley area, there is not equal pay and parity for women versus male salaries. And I also think, you know, related to that is really providing opportunities for there to be parity of gender as well as diversity all the way up to the C-suite. So really seeing women in positions of power and authority, and also as we go down the pipeline, making sure that women's pay is equal to their male counterparts in their pay. So I think, you know, that absolutely has to be addressed. You know, we just need to put that out there. If I'm a woman, I should make the same amount and possibly more, you know, if my performance allows it, than my male counterparts. And I think that until we address this issue of equal pay, we're going to continue to see issues in terms of equity in the space.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that, because I think that this conversation around pay equity also has to extend to other, you know, sort of equity indicators in an organization. Part of this is about being transparent. So the more that we actually push organizations to share data, whether that's internally or externally, the more progress we're going to make. Someone the other day said to me, like, people don't change when they see the light, they change when they feel the heat. And I actually think that that's a really, you know, really thoughtful insight, in that people have to actually feel uncomfortable about some of these things. So one of the things, I think for Google, one of the things we espouse as an organization is this idea of like transparency. And it's taking us some time to get there around the diversity topic, but increasingly we're sharing more with Googlers, and the next step is to start to share more of that outside the organization. So for instance, you know, last year we started with like, let's just talk about our numbers. Everybody knows that they're pretty crappy anyway, so let's just put it out there. This year we're actually, for the first time, we actually broke down our employee survey data. So we looked at what are the actual experiences of women, of senior women, of Black Googlers, of, you know, Hispanic, and let's talk about where we see some of those differences. So we put it up on the main stage this year at our company-wide meeting, and we said, look, we're going to share this with you, and we're going to have a conversation. And to Lisa's point, we can't have these conversations in silos where you're just talking to the women about the women's experience. When you think about your organizations being, you know, 70, 80% men, if they're not talking about this, then this is a losing battle altogether. So how do we enlist men in that conversation? I think we are starting to do a much more effective job of that. And it is a struggle to have the conversation. It does feel uncomfortable. for people to have the conversation. There is much debate around it, but I think that if it's not feeling uncomfortable, you're probably not doing it right, because it is a hard topic to talk about. But I think when we think about how we're actually going to not just count the numbers around diversity, but actually figure out how do we make those numbers count, we have to be thinking about parity and inclusion and civility and respect inside of all of our organizations.
I wanted just to add, and I'm glad Kimberly raised the pay issue. There's a bill, I think, maybe our mayor knows, there's a bill that's been proposed in California, a Fair Pay Act, or amending the Fair Pay Act. One of the provisions is to make it illegal for a company to retaliate against employees who talk about their salaries. And just to Milka's point about transparency, one of the ways that tech in particular has benefited enormously is there's sort of an unwritten rule that you cannot discuss pay with your colleagues. You can't go anywhere in the company and ask, what am I paid relative to similar, to people in similar positions. And I would add that I don't think the bill covers it, but for tech, it's got to cover stock and stock grants. And some companies are starting to get rid of salary negotiations, because salary negotiations, the research backs this up, and it's also my experience, the more degrees of different you are from Caucasian male, heterosexual, the more narrow the band of acceptable behavior. So if you're a woman who's talking about salary, if you're a person of color who's talking about salary or saying pushing back and negotiating, you are viewed differently. We have different expectations based on race and gender about what's acceptable behavior. And I think that also is, ends up disadvantaging people of color and women.
Yeah. I've been asked to have you guys share this, and they're going to turn off the lavalier.
Okay.
Do you want me to add something? I mean, I'm not in a corporate environment like those of you, but I have been in one. And it kind of gets back to something that you said about microaggression. I think we have a gentler, kinder word for it in government, which is unconscious or implicit bias. And it comes in many disguises. Like if I had a dime for every time someone said, shouldn't you wait till your children are a little older before you run for office? Thank you. Thank you. It's like every male mayor has asked that. Well, and you know what's funny? Well, did anyone ask Obama that? What's funny is women are the ones that have guilt-tripped me about this. My kids were 2 and 4 the first time I ran for office. They're 7 and 9 now. And so, it doesn't seem like it's sexist, but trust me, it feels that way. And when you think about all the different ways that, unless you unpack it, there is kind of built in. You were talking about interns before, and as mayor, a lot of people ask, a lot of people want to intern in the mayor's office. It sounds far more glamorous, and trust me, it really is. But a lot of times, people I know will ask, well, can my child intern in your office? Now, that is a relationship of privilege, is it not? One of the best interns I ever had, a young man named Anthony Wilson. And I was walking down 19th and Telegraph, and I see this young man drop a candy wrapper on the ground. And I say, oh, sweetheart, look how beautiful this city is. Could you please pick that up? It looks so much nicer without trash. And I thought he was going to, give me a fuck you, bitch, kind of, I'm sorry. And he's like, ma'am, I am so sorry. You are absolutely right. And one thing led to another, and the next thing I know, he's interning in my office, and he had a very interesting life story, but he was a fantastic intern, and I literally picked him up off the street. And so I think, to re-examine all the processes that we have in place that reward kind of privilege or status that we don't, that we kind of take for granted. So just remember Anthony for me.
That's actually a good segue into, I wanted to talk about where we are right now, which is Oakland, which is significant for a number of reasons, of course. One is that it's an incredibly diverse community, that it's very community-minded, and there's a huge amount of potential in its citizens and students to be central to a more diverse workforce in tech, in the Bay, especially in the Bay Area. The other is that being so close to Silicon Valley, but still somewhat less expensive than San Francisco and the Peninsula, means that it's becoming a much more attractive place for businesses and tech workers to relocate to, which, as we know, has its benefits and its challenges and risks of displacement and other issues. So if we're thinking of Oakland as a kind of central ground to, let's say, build the ideal tech community in a lot of ways, in terms of talent and policy and corporate responsibility, what are each of you doing in your work, or what do you think can contribute to that positively, and what missteps would be important to prevent? And you can feel free to ask each other questions about this as well. I'm sure some people have questions for Mayor Schaaf in particular, but.
All right, well, who wants to start on that?
Yeah, Mike.
I'll start, since we moved from San Francisco to Oakland intentionally because we thought this is going to be the next tech hub, and we wanted to help make that happen. Mm-hmm. So we moved our home, we moved our office. We're building the Kapor Center for Social Impact at the corner of Broadway and Franklin and 22nd. We are really focused on how to help build the ecosystem. So both for investing, for grant making, for hiring, for nonprofits, helping the Oakland Unified School District. We want to make sure that this is gentrification done right, that people who live in Oakland now get those jobs and not getting displaced. What kind of on-ramps can we build? What can we do to increase the tax base, because that's what happens when tech comes in, and how do we have a voice in how that new tax revenue gets spent?
You want to jump in? We followed the same path, similar to what Frida mentioned for Kapor Center. Our organization was actually founded in San Francisco in Bayview Hunters Point, and then we moved here with Impact Hub Oakland in summer of 2012. No, 13? What year is it? 2015? I'm so busy I can't remember. So in summer 2013, and we've stayed here with Impact Hub Oakland. Much to the dismay of Mayor Lee, he would love to have us back on the San Francisco side. But we also moved here, for a very specific reason, is that the demographics of the majority of students that we are serving in the Bay Area are coming from East Bay and places on this side of the bridge. And much of that because there's such a small percentage of African American and people of color that are still living in San Francisco. So much more brown on this side of the bridge. That's the population that we serve. But we also really felt, similar to Kapor, that this would be a very good place to put our stake in the ground and help the community to have a voice in this new era, this new tech innovation that's happening here in Oakland, which is something that you don't really see in San Francisco. I still live in San Francisco, and I see the growth and the impact that tech has had on our city, even in just the few 7 years, it's almost 8 now that I've been in San Francisco. It has changed dramatically. And a lot of that I can absolutely say is because of tech. When I moved there, Twitter was not down the street from my house. And now there is like a new high-rise on literally every inch of space that they could put one in our city. And I have seen the impact that it's had on our communities that really had diverse income communities, which now not so much because things have gone out of the roof. And I don't want that to happen. I want to see that here in Oakland. I really want to see the community be a part of the change, the community to actually profit from the change and not a select category of individuals. So that is why we are here. And I definitely hope we will eventually talk to Mayor Schaaf about this, because there's a lot of work to do and opening opportunities. We're just starting to work in Oakland schools now a lot closer, but We are just seeing that so much more needs to be done to make sure the people in this community are getting what they need, and starting in school, and starting in kindergarten, starting in our elementary schools, really looking at the infrastructure here, because it's easier for us to work with San Francisco Unified than it is to work for Oakland. They're more resourced than Oakland Unified School District. So I think that's something we really need to have some honest discussion about, because we don't want the kids to leave this community. We want them to stay here and build this community so that it doesn't become another San Francisco. So that was a long-winded answer, but I just feel really strongly about getting that out there.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to take a step back and just talk a little bit about gentrification. I was at a happy hour last year with some folks that I didn't really know as well, and I just remember one of the ladies that I was having a drink with, she said, "Isn't gentrification just about city development? Don't people want better sidewalks?" Right? And I think there is a lot of misunderstandings about what gentrification means and what people actually want from gentrification. Just because somebody has always lived in Oakland doesn't mean they don't want better neighborhoods, you know? And I think there is, again, a problem. I'm like fixated on the language in which we talk about this, but I think it's very important for us to point that out. I think there's some things that we do at Pandora that I am particularly proud of. You know, we've always been in Oakland, and our founders have been very, very honest in that if Pandora was not founded in Oakland, it probably would have been just one of the many failed startups out there, for two reasons. One, you know, just not being able to afford an office space in San Francisco, in the peninsula, and then the second, it was, you know, when Pandora ran into some issues in the Hill, the community here really, really rallied behind this product that they loved. We intentionally do not serve food in our office. We don't have a cafeteria. We don't have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We don't want to keep people at Pandora. Our employees all go out into the community and support the local businesses, and many of them are owned by women and those women of color, et cetera. And I think what is significant about that is, do we lose candidates over it? Absolutely. You know, just the other day, somebody wrote in a rejection form, I chose to go to X company because they have cafeterias, and I spend a lot of time thinking about my food choices, and I don't want to. And we're very, very clear in that it is our intention to keep doing this. I mean, we do provide, you know, snacks and fruit, again, sourced from local farmers markets and et cetera, to support our employees that way. But we're very intentional about, that's one way that we can really support the local community, because we understand that when the local community thrives, we thrive, right? And I think that's also been one of the criticisms around tech, is that tech is supposed to be something that is really supposed to have humans at the core of it, but we've gone so far to have now taken the human element out of it. So how do we put that back in? You know, how do we start to really look at tech as a way to bring us closer together and not further apart? Some other things that we do, recruiting from Mills College, going to Laney College, right? Supporting the local schools here, offering, you know, workshops, the way that we do our giving back efforts. We're very intentional about keeping it in Oakland. Our employees get 40 hours of volunteer time off to do work, and we actually organize things specifically in our local communities to make that happen. We've had many national organizations come and approach us about wanting to pilot something in Oakland now that they have, you know, the huge national press, and now they're like, oh, Oakland would be a great place for us to now seed a program. And we would much rather support programs like the one that Kimberly has built, because it is in our backyard, it is homegrown. So that's our philosophy as a company.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what Google's doing. We're obviously not based here in Oakland. We're in Mountain View and also have offices in San Francisco and San Bruno. But we do, I think it's important for us to be good neighbors and contributing in the places that you know, Googlers live and work. And so we're thinking about this in two ways. The first is around partnerships, and the second is around sort of volunteerism. So we have now at Google, over 50,000 employees. I don't have the right number of how many of them work here in the Bay Area, but we have a significant opportunity, I think, to get Googlers out into their communities contributing. And so one of the things that we do at Google every year is we have a program called Google Serve. Last year we had more than 12,000 Googlers go out in their communities and contribute their time and their intellectual capital in some way across 800 projects. And many of those took place here in Oakland. The other thing that we're doing is, like I said, around some partnerships. Last year, at the end of last year, we decided that we're going to be launching a long-term, high-investment, high-touch student program. And there were 2 markets in the country we've identified as where we want to launch. Oakland is one of them, New York is the other. We need to talk about that. We're still laying early groundwork, but we started to talk with partners like Level Playing Field, Hack the Hood, Black Girls Code. So we see, again, some of it is about the population that we want to serve is here. So we're going to that population, and we see the opportunity and the vibrancy of this community, and think we have a responsibility and a tremendous opportunity to make deeper investments.
I'm so excited to have the last word on this question. I love what you had to say about tech is about human-centered design, good tech, and it's about innovation. And so I'm thrilled that people are recognizing that to really have an environment where tech is going to thrive, maybe you have to get out of that sprawling, soulless campus, no offense, and come into the city. Get out of the valley, come down to the lake. You know, there is a vibrancy here. There is a realness here. There's an authenticity. I know I promised Erica I wouldn't swear, but I'm just going to do it one more time. I read David Eggers' The Circle, and it scared the shit out of me. Did anybody else read that book? You all have to. It should be required reading, The Circle by David Eggers. So you've got to keep it real. And one thing that I think a lesson that Oakland has to teach other cities, other communities, and I am born and raised here. I've lived here all my life, and what I've been so proud about Oakland is we are not just diverse, but we are inclusive. So it's not just like New York has a lot of different ethnicities that all live off in their own little neighborhoods and don't mingle. But you walk into any bar, any restaurant in Oakland, and you look at who's sitting next to who at the bar, and it is a mix of people. And not just race, gender identity, sexual orientation, you name it. So what does that do? You know, as mayor, I've gotten to recruit talent to come work for my administration, and I have just been focused on who can deliver results for me. And I've been so excited about what a diverse group of people have come. And so many of them are actually not from Oakland. But as a diverse population, they chose to move here because they felt comfortable here. It is a good feeling place for a lot of different kinds of people. And when we talked about corporate atmosphere and what it feels like to encourage diversity, if you don't make all people feel comfortable, they're probably not going to stay very long. And so that is a great thing that Oakland has had to offer and will continue. And other cities should pay attention to this, because when you create vibrant public spaces, when you create opportunities for different people of different income levels and backgrounds to mingle and get to know each other, that is when you have that magic alchemy that strengthens all of us. It is exciting to be Oakland, California right now. The millennial workforce is discovering that cities are the exciting place to be. And that is going to really fuel the next stage of innovation in tech, which has got to be human-focused.
I just have to add to that again. I feel like the voice here that says, well, maybe, but maybe not. As I mentioned, I work, my business is in Oakland, and I live in San Francisco. And I've often, in the 8 years I've been here, have all the time. My daughter goes to school in Oakland, so we have some firm roots over here, but I haven't moved, basically because I really love San Francisco, so I just put that out there, let you know. I love it. I love it. There are things that drive me crazy every day, but I still love it. And I just love the Bay Area. But I think that a lot of the things that the mayor said about Oakland, if you look back in the history of San Francisco, that was in the DNA of San Francisco back 10, 20, maybe more than 10, maybe 20, 30 years ago as well. And we've seen over the years how that has started to shift. So I think as we're building this ecosystem here, I think it's really important to look at history and look how movements have changed the fabric of communities as they've grown. I'm really interested in Oakland because as I've looked here and I've really started to really reflect on Oakland, it's a very special place. But I also think, there are definitely inequities. So if I go into flatlands, lowlands, areas of Oakland, very different than if I'm uptown. But now that we have an opportunity for some real investment in the community, what are we going to do with that? Because we have an opportunity right now. We have an opportunity that we probably have never had in Oakland before because a rising tide raises all sails. And I want those sails to be those people that are in the flatlands. I want those sails to not just be people that are transferring over here from San Francisco because it's too high to live there. So that's why I stay. That's why I really focus on doing this work in the community because there's a lot of work to be done. So I don't think that we can, really rest on the merits of where we are right here today. We need to be planning on how is Oakland going to look in 20 years? How is it going to look in 30 years? And how do we make sure that picture is an equitable one?
And what do any of you think is a concrete thing that can be done, in the short term to sort of prevent what has happened in San Francisco, to make sure that this is that it is the community that's building this community, as opposed to kind of learn from the history that you're talking about in order to make sure that the Oakland is built in the right way?
For me, I would say, and I'll pass it the mic, is that we have to invest in our youth. And we have to make sure we have pipeline programs that are job training programs that are going to create opportunities for our community to be part of this tech ecosystem and to really be able to participate, because we're not seeing other communities. So invest in our schools, invest in our education, invest in programs like SMASH that is doing work with the schools over here before anyone else was doing anything with the schools. K-Port Center and SMASH was working with Oakland Unified to bring opportunities and introduce other organizations that could bring tech into the classroom. So creating opportunities for the next generation and working also with their parents and with others to create job opportunities for the tech that's coming over.
Listen, I just did a whole hour on Michael Krasny's forum yesterday. I don't know if anybody heard it, but it was all on how to avoid the ills of gentrification in Oakland. And believe me, this is what keeps me up every night. Because it is an incredible opportunity that we're seeing right now, and it is also an incredible threat. And as somebody who's born and raised here, who is so proud of our history and our heritage and what we are, that uniqueness, I do not want to see that wiped out. I do not want to see the long-term Oaklanders priced out or pushed out. And I do think we have the opportunity to ensure that that prosperity that I am very hopeful and somewhat confident is coming actually benefits the people who are already here. We've got to address the issue of affordability. And that comes both in the terms of the cost of housing, which is ridiculous. Oakland now has the second fastest rising rents in the entire country. And it also has to do with ensuring that our residents have sufficient incomes to live here. And I get back to why I think raising the minimum wage has actually something to do with the tech pipeline, because that has to do with that equity issue. I won't hog the stage, but all I can say to you is I literally, this is my fear, my challenge. I take it very seriously, and I have a big like housing roadmap coming out in the end of May. But I also agree that it really starts with education in schools, and not just these work programs, because sometimes by then it's too late. I really want to create a city where every child expects to go to college. They expect to go to college from the time they enter kindergarten. They know that money should not be an issue, because we are a wealthy enough society that we should be able to help all families afford college.
Can I just add one more thing? I want to, yes, absolutely, all of those things that you ladies talked about. I would like for us to think about how each of us individually can feel empowered to make changes. Yesterday, I got an email through my HOA. Somebody in my building is renting their exact same size apartment as mine for $1,000 higher than I've rented my apartment, right? Now, I have two choices. I can either up my rent so that it matches that market price, or I can keep it the same for my tenants who have lived there for the last 3 years. And that's a personal choice that I have to make, right? So yes, all of us here, we represent companies and organizations, and we're doing a lot of things, but we all in this room have the power to make changes, right? So if you're going on a date, if you're going on a family outing, bring people into Oakland. There's so many wonderful activities, things that are going on. There are certain restaurants that are, again, locally owned by, people of color. Support those places, and, make donations to LPFI, Black Girls Code. I think, again, we really have to also notice the power within all of us individually, to make sure that, we keep Oakland, the way that we love, with all of these elements that we love about it.
A quick comment, and also I want to address one of the questions that's here about what can be done to support people of color and women who already have the talent and aren't getting hired. I think that Oakland can develop a very conscious and different kind of tech ecosystem. We can, as investors, as engineers, as all the organizations that come together, we can put together a call for startups that address real problems that people in Oakland face. And those are the businesses that ought to get launched. We actually don't need any more photo sharing apps. We do need a lot more we need tech brought to bear on workforce issues. We need to figure out, how do we develop certificate programs to be the onboarding for tech jobs? And then how do we create those tech ladders? How do we do that as blended learning kind of classes that's part tech, that's part in classroom? How do we reward competencies when people have already learned things on the job, and not just reward time in the seat? There are lots and lots and lots of things we can do to ensure that the talent that is here gets developed to meet the needs of tech, and that people's lived experience, as the 4 entrepreneurs I showed you, how do we take lived experience and turn those into businesses, profitable businesses that solve real problems?
Thank you. I wanted to bring it back for a minute to the individual responsibility issue that Lisa was talking about, but sort of back into the tech workforce space, which is that actually, as you mentioned in a conversation we had the other day, there's a lot of talk about the business benefits of a diverse workforce, but getting a seat at the table only means something if people are empowered to actually speak up and make decisions. So what can senior leadership, people who are actually at the table, what can those people do in order to ensure, the same thing we were talking about before, you don't just want to talk to the women about the women issues, you don't just want to talk to people of color about issues they're facing, and what should senior leadership be actively doing, taking personal responsibility in order to change a lot of the obstacles that people are facing?
I'll just start about internships. I'll get back to the story of Anthony. If you have decision-making power in your company, think about your internship program and think about where you get those interns from. And so make a conscious effort to reach out to a source. Maybe it's Met West High School in Oakland, which is actually just across the lake, that requires internships as part of their curriculum and have a tremendous support system for their students. But these, most of these kids are going to be first in their families to go to college. I mean, it's a great source. And then when you've got those kids, don't just stick them out in the hall and have them answer the phones or do filing. Find a little desk, put it inside your office so that they are right there and can absorb everything you're doing. Give them little words of wisdom between your phone calls, and then give them a project that they can take from start to finish so they have that sense of accomplishment at the end of their term. I am just such a believer in the power of internships. That's one thing everybody out here could do.
I think what you're touching on is a topic that is really consuming Google right now in terms of the way that we're trying to talk about diversity very differently than we have in the past. I've been at Google for 10 years. I've been on the diversity team for about 7 of those years. And in the last couple of years, we're really trying to shift the conversation about the ownership for diversity. So instead of approaching it in this very programmatic way that's owned by HR, we're really trying to squarely put the ownership for this work into the hands of our senior leadership. They are running this organization and they are accountable for what happens when it comes to this topic. One of the things that we're doing on that front is really around shifting the conversations that they're having about diversity. Google is probably a little over half engineering, so there is a very analytical and kind of intellectual approach that we think we use to kind of discuss diversity and think about our goals, which is great. We certainly have to have data and the numbers to back up and validate the conversation that this is an area that needs to be addressed. But it needs to extend beyond that. And so we are helping our leaders, coaching them, kind of painstakingly sitting with them and handing them the reins around this discussion. They need to be the folks that are front and center talking about why this matters, how they've seen this bring value to the organization. They need to be the ones having the tough conversation. And some of the ways that we're facilitating that is by helping them to really connect to the stories. So again, I think leaders grasp this. There's very few leaders, I think, in most of our organizations that don't get it on some level, that don't understand the need for it. But I'm not sure that they really connect to it, that they really understand those experiences. And so how can we actually bridge that divide for them, where they can hear firsthand the obstacles and the barriers that exist for these populations that are oftentimes just missed by the majority group. And so we are having lots of leader listening sessions, as we call them, in small ways, and town hall sessions, and one-to-one lunches, where we're actually, giving leaders the tools to unpack these conversations, to become more aware of those experiences, and then to speak about them. And there's just such a tentativeness that I think our leaders have to get up on the stage and say, this matters, oftentimes because they think that they're going to do it wrong, they're going to fail, they're going to put their foot in their mouth, and they almost always do. But that's totally fine. I think that what matters is that you're standing up and you're talking about it. It's how you recover from those failures in terms of saying things wrong that will show and demonstrate that you're committed to the cause. And so we are incredibly focused on empowering leaders to own this, to really look at their own leadership teams. It's not my problem that you don't have any women on your leadership team. Like, why is that? Ask yourself the question, why your team is not diverse, and then tell me how we're going to solve it, instead of me trying to, sort of force a conversation. So we're actually seeing a lot of progress in approaching it the kind of tough love way with our leadership, and helping them to find a more emotional connectivity to the issues that are there.
So it looks like we have 1 minute left. So if anyone else wants to say something about...
Well, I was just going to say, I think, get curious, right? Get curious around your data. Anytime anybody presents you with any data about how your company's doing, ask to see the data cut by gender and race and ethnicity, right? Look at promotions, look at attrition, get curious about the engagement of all of your employees. And I wanted, I was hoping that maybe Frida can talk a little bit about the question around where are the African-American male panelists, because I would really like to see some of them up here as well. Right. So whoever asked that question.
It's a great question, and there are many African-American men that could easily join our panel, as well as Latinas and Latinos. The one thing, I just want to give an example of the way you can turn this on its head. What if you said nobody gets promoted to be a senior manager unless they have already demonstrated that they can build and manage a diverse team?
why do we define qualifications as having a computer science degree from Stanford, and why don't we, when you're a senior manager, you spend your time people managing? Why don't we say, tell us about your experience being and only on a board of a nonprofit and what that taught you that allows you to be a better leader?
I think that's a good place to end. Thank you, everyone, very much. And obviously, we could stay here for 4 hours and never touch all of the important issues here. But thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to the panelists.